All right. Hello. I feel like we're going to have a few more trickling in as lunch finishes, but I'm glad to see everybody who's already in the room. And hi to our online audience. I hear that there's a few following us digitally. My name's Teresa Hartmann. I sit at IETA. My day job is on the ICVCM, which is the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. And we're going to spend the next hour or so speaking with our panel about fostering best practice in offsetting and carbon management more broadly. I have some wonderful speakers here with me. I have Alvin Lim, who joins us from Morgan Stanley. He's the Executive Director and Head of Asia Environmental Products. We have Sue Nieto Hernandez, who's a Senior Lead for Low Carbon Trading at BP. Takashi, I'm sure you all know from the IETA board, but also Mitsui & Co. Global Strategic Studies Institute. And on my other side, we have Vinod, who joins us from Emergent Ventures International, where he's the founder and managing director, and Meg Gesh, who's a senior technical manager of industrial programs at the American Carbon Registry. So what we want to do today is talk a little bit about integrity and quality in voluntary carbon markets. And I'm going to spend a minute or so to walk you all through the acronym jungle, because I think we're all aware that there's quite a few initiatives sprouting up in this space. But I think broadly speaking, what we've seen is that there's incredible churn, right, around what's a good offset, what's a good credit, what constitutes quality. There's a lot of scrutiny on buyers, right, as in like how are buyers, how is the demand side using credits, offsets in their net zero strategy, in their climate strategies more broadly, for carbon neutrality claims, and so on. And I think as a result of that churn, of that pressure, of that momentum in the space, we've seen all these initiatives pop up. Right? So you have at IETA, for example, we run the ICROA accreditation, which is a third-party audit that looks whether or not credit suppliers adhere to our code of best practice. We have seen so much demand for that we've recently had to open that up to the broader world of the carbon markets, right? So no longer just for IETA members, now open to everybody. But also we're a member of the ICVCM Secretariat, right? And like for those of you less familiar, the ICVCM is trying to come up with a label, a quality label for carbon credits that are in the market today, to help buyers navigate a little bit where to go, what to buy, what to use, and where high quality sits. On the flip side of that, so I work for the ICVCM. On the flip side of that, you have the VCMI, because we didn't have a whole lot of letters in the voluntary carbon market. So the VCMI is the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative. And where I look at credit quality, they look at the quality, at the integrity of the demand side, right? So they really look at what point can you make an offsetting claim and how should corporates be using these credits. On the back of that, because that wasn't enough, a couple of weeks ago at COP, you saw all kinds of net zero guidance come out, right? So the UN came out with net zero guidance for corporates. ISO came out with net zero guidance for corporates. IOSCO actually came into the space and said, well, hang on a minute, what is actually the role of financial regulators to regulate voluntary carbon markets? So they have an ongoing consultation open on that as well. Why am I telling you all of this? Because I'm trying to say there is a flurry, there is a wave of integrity initiatives underway in the voluntary carbon market. And we want to talk about that a little bit today with our panel, as in like, what is happening? Is it helping? Is it more confusing? Are we creating clarity? And I think that's the question for today. So let me start by asking our panel, like, amidst all these questions that we're raising on claims, on standards, on credits, what's the #1 challenge that you see for transparency and integrity today? And let me start down there with Alan.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks for going through all the acronyms. I feel like you've made our lives a lot easier. I'm going to refer to a couple of them in a bit. But hi, everyone. Alvin, as Teresa mentioned, I head up the Asia Environmental Products business at Morgan Stanley. I think for your question, what's the one thing that's really important is standards. I think the corporates that we speak to often ask us, I want to do something, I want voluntarily to participate, but can you help me understand what is acceptable, what kind of claims I can make? So that's probably what we see.
Excellent. Sue, in one word or three, what's the #1 challenge?
I would say uncertainty. Like we don't know. There's no clarity. It's an evolving issue. And the other thing would be adaptation, like in the sense of like, this is an evolving concept. how do we quickly, or as quickly as possible, adapt to responding to the new demands or the new criteria or the new requirements? And I think that that's a challenge.
Takashi, your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. That is a very, very difficult question for me because I'd like to say several languages, but need to say pick up just one language. So from that point of view, I think the most important one is disclosure. So in a financial world, there are two types of way or approaches. So the information to be provided to the market and explained to the market, and the market will decide that is good or bad. That is a conventional way. And the other way is like a taxonomy. Third parties show this is a criteria for good or bad to distinguish. Two types of approach are there. But anyhow, need to disclose to the market. From that point of view, the one single word I'd like to pick up is disclosure to the market.
Excellent. Let me turn to the other side. Vinod, number one issue.
Already on? Yeah, okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vinod Kala from Emergent Ventures, and we do a lot of work in sustainability here. So one word answer, I think 3 words maybe. The question is, did it happen? So this from the supply side. When actually you're looking at a carbon credit, you have to be sure that the result, either in reduction or a removal, actually happened, right? And then there are a number of elements below that. And possibly at some point in time, I'll possibly get the chance to explain that, how we look at that, those issues.
This is Meghas Tiwari from American Carbon Registry. And since we are a registry, we always ask about additionality, right? Because we set the standards and write the methodologies. So I think additionality is the #1 thing when it comes to carbon offsets, in ensuring integrity. And there are various standards that you talked about, like ICVC, MBC, MI, that talk about different ways of setting additionality. So there are various ways that you could demonstrate additionality, and I guess even though there may be various ways that you could establish an additionality, that has to be something that can be something that can be explained to the project developers, that can be defended when asked difficult questions about, like, why do you think this is additional, right? Because one example could be, would something happen without carbon offsets or not? But the other way to ask that same question is, would carbon offsets also accelerate reduction in GHG emissions, right? So additionality can be defined in various ways, and I think it has to be something that can be defendable, to ensure integrity. So I think that's Excellent.
So you got 5 different views on what's really key to drive integrity in the next couple of years in the voluntary carbon market. And Vinod, I wanted to start with you and give you a little bit of time to actually explain in more words. So you're unique in the sense that you advise project developers from start to finish, right, getting to the market, but you also work with buyers in terms of looking at how they build their offsetting portfolios. What is it you tell them today? Like, what is high quality? How much does the price tell you about that? What are the kind of strategies you're asking your clients to employ?
So when you are actually, let's say, working with a buyer or a corporate with a commitment, then first question is that from their strategic point of view, which kind of carbon credits make sense? So it's not necessarily that for all buyers, all kinds of carbon credits make sense. So one, there is a choice to be applied there. But when you start looking at the projects, then the key issue, for example, first is, I think, as mentioned, additionality, right? So the additionality assessment, how it has been carried out, right? What is the baseline that has been assumed? Is it correct or not correct? Is it conservative or not conservative? That's the first question to be answered, right? Then the second question to be answered is how it has been monitored and what is the quality of monitoring that has been done. So you will find, of course, projects which have got issued certifications from using a particular standard, whether Vera, gold standard, or any other kind of, let's say, standard. they have met a certain minimum qualification already, right? But beyond that, there is a necessity to look at sometimes that the choices that have been made in terms of the baselines and the monitoring, whether they could have been different, where there is risk attached to that. So we can evaluate, and then the client may say, okay, this particular project is more acceptable compared to the other project. We don't change, of course, the quantum of credit, but definitely the way it has been carried out can be chosen, right? So that's another important issue. The third issue clearly is the ESG impact of that particular project. So we look at a lot of data about that project, where it has been carried out, where have there been any conflicts with the local community, whether it has had any negative impact. So one is this negative, didn't happen kind of a criteria. The second is a positive impact, that, okay, it has actually, for example, led to a lot of employment, water table rising, for example. There are plantation projects which create that, or soil carbon improving, or biodiversity element improving. So whether it has had a positive impact, and you can actually evaluate the project for the positive impacts to see whether this makes better sense, and the clients are actually willing to pay higher price even in India. So if the projects are good, having a very positive impact, they are happy buying that, because clearly if a project you have bought and later on a challenge is made against that project, that this project didn't result in something positive for the environment, in that case, you run a risk. It's a voluntary commitment that you've taken, but you run a risk if the project is not of good quality. So this is the ESG impact assessment and evaluation becomes very important element. The fourth element, which is not present currently in the project but should be brought in, is the traceability. That a client may end up buying from let's say 5 or 6 or maybe 10 projects depending on the quantum, and their ability to trace back what that project was, right? Where did it come from? Which particular community? How much impact did it have? Whether it was a properly validated, verified? Who was the validated and verification? These are the questions that need to be, at some point in time, when required, to be answered. And that traceability can be brought in by digital technologies. So digital MRV and digital traceability technologies, including blockchain, I think announcement has already been made in developing maybe a common blockchain structure across the world for monitoring. So this becomes very important as well. So I think these are some of the important parameters. If we can manage that, then the long-term risk of being involved in buying a carbon credit from a particular project goes down for a client. So,
excellent. Thanks. Let me flip that over to the corporates who are buying those credits. Alvin, question for you. We're kind of hearing from vNode at the moment that there isn't a one-size-fits-all. Price isn't the decisive factor. It depends on creating multiple impacts that fit the corporate sustainability strategy, and buyers will pay for that. Alvin, I think Morgan Stanley has a carbon neutral commitment. You are actively purchasing some of these credits.
Well, the corporate is, but also on behalf of a lot of our corporate clients through the commodity desk where I sit, we're also facilitating some of these transactions. I think for us, we tend to start the message by kind of explaining that we're in a climate emergency. We need to act now. And all solutions should be considered, meaning both technology-based and nature-based solutions. So that's kind of the first point that we highlight. The second thing we tend to share is that price does not equal quality. They are positively correlated, but price is also a factor of supply and demand of a given project and the perceived value for a given corporate entity, maybe because that's where their operations are. So price does not equal quality. And then lastly is that quality is highly subjective, and we think it's driven by a number of uncorrelated factors. So some of the factors that we consider when kind of advocating for a diversified portfolio of carbon offsets is, firstly, project level, meaning after taking into consideration things like additionality, permanence, and leakage, how can we diversify on the project level by project types, by region, and by vintage? The other type of risk that we then looked at is data integrity risk. How do you know that this project is removing or reducing 1 ton of emissions and saying what it will do? And here I think we tried to get corporates to mitigate this risk using three tools. Firstly, work with the reputable standards, right? So people like Verra, Gold Standard, they've been around a long time. They've spent a lot of time developing these methodology, have gone through rigorous public consultation processes. So let's use some of these standards. The second one is to work with leading developers. There are developers that's been around only for the last few years, but there's also a number that's been around for over a decade. So we work with the leading developers. And the last one is potentially to use some of the rating agencies that have emerged over the last 2 years. People like Silvera, B0, Calix, Trove, they provide additional insights and data transparency into some of these projects that we may not have 2 years ago. So that's on data integrity risk. I think the other two risks that we like to look at is media and marketing. How do you mitigate that type of risk? One way is to use many of the acronyms that you mentioned, right? To look at what the ICVCM core carbon principles have said on what is considered a high quality carbon credit, to look at what the VCMI has said on the type of claims that you can make as a corporate, and I think SBTI too, has done a lot of effort to describe what do you need to achieve at net zero and what kind of credits you can use then. But also there is a path to net zero in which you have to go and do beyond value chain mitigation, and I think they've been a lot clearer in the recent months on the use of compensation credits and avoidance credits on the path to net zero. And then lastly, we ask corporates to think about also the liquidity risk, meaning if you wanted to buy only one project and you're a large buyer, you're often going to end up having to pay a lot more potentially. How do you mitigate that liquidity risk on a consistent basis such that you can buy over a 10-year period and still get the kind of mix that you want? And then that comes back to why we think having a diversified portfolio approach to buying carbon offsets is the right way to go.
I'm going to pick up on one of the many points you just made, but one, and they're all very valid, I think, risks to factor into your investment decision. But you did pick up on the question of data availability and transparency and how easy is it to make those decisions. And I think, Takashi, that's the perfect moment to bring you in. You did mention disclosure in your opening, your one word key issues to tackle. How do you think that disclosure and improved standards around that are going to help us raise integrity in carbon markets?
Yes, regarding the carbon market and the carbon credit, my approach is there are two types of credit. It's first one is regulation purpose, and other is a voluntary one. So in case of regulation, we do not necessarily to think about the quality or etc. Because the tone is tone, and everything are regulated by the government or regulator. But in case of voluntary, of course, the supply side we need to think about, but also we have to think about the demand side, because there's no regulation, no specific rules. So both supply side and the demand side we need to look at. So I happen to be touched upon the ICAO Corsia's eligible criteria. I am a member of the test of the programs. So the several programs are listed up, and we evaluate the approach of the several different programs. So as he said, the most of the important element of the methodology are almost the same. So a little bit different things are there, but mostly the same, because all of them are based on CDM before. So that's the reason why very similar. From that point of view, if we talk about the quality, I think one of the important points is vintage. And the second one is now we are under the Paris Agreement board, corresponding adjustment. And number three is monitoring of the project itself. Not only the approval time, after the project implementation, during the project implementation, we need to look at the performance of the project. So regarding the disclosure, so as mentioned, the demand side and the supply side, no perfect answer, no single answer, which is good. And I think to explain, the buyer of the credit need to explain to the market and to the stakeholders why we choose this credit and this standard, etc. And why we need to choose this type of project, because some company prefer to have a specific type of project or specific countries, because it is related to their business. Like a company who are operated in Indonesia, it is likely to prefer to use a credit in Indonesia. So that is a kind of the preference, not a quality issue. The preference matter we need to think about. So from buyer's point of view, even though the standard like ICBCM are there, but it maybe it's not enough for this strategy. So they need to, explain why we need to use this type of credit to the market. That is my view.
Thank you, Takashi. Sue, I'd love to bring you in over there. You're also in a similar role where you're kind of looking at helping buyers overcome their confusion and creating that transparency and confidence in the market. What do you think is the right formula? We've just heard a bit about disclosure. What else do we need?
Yeah, I think it kind of like all ways lead to Rome kind of thing, where like I think ultimately all of this is related to the evolving definition of quality and integrity, and how do we adapt to this? I think while we welcome and encourage this increased scrutiny in the market and increased demand for transparency, at the same time we acknowledge that we are in some sort of transition period where the initiatives that are aiming to bring alignment on these topics are still not finalized, much like the ICBCM and the core carbon principles. So the reality is that the context in which we're operating is quite challenging. On one hand, you have existing projects that have been operating for a number of years, 10 years, and we increasingly don't know whether they will be able to withstand this new level of scrutiny, this new level of requirements. On the other hand, you also have developers who are trying to respond to the increased demand in a context where there is a lot of uncertainty and where you have to start making assumptions onto what will be accepted, what will be fulfilling these requirements. I think at the basic level, like what Takashi was saying, we understand like we're focusing on additionality, permanence, etc. But the question is, how are we going to prove this? Where the benchmark is, how much evidence is enough, etc. So much to Albin's point as well, when he was going through that list, I think the message is right now is taking a lot of resources and effort for everyone to try to understand and assess what quality or what integrity projects are. So I think in this context for us, what we are doing is developing principles of high integrity, and we would use these principles of high integrity to guide our future decision making. And like I said, this is at a basic level focusing on additionality, permanence, environmental impact, social safeguards. Again, aligning to what Alvin was mentioning is, of course, working with third-party certifications and standards, but with the understanding as well that in some cases additional social safeguards might be needed, for example. So we're trying to develop this framework and use this as our guiding star in a way to make sure that all the projects that BP buys or provides for their clients are in line with these best practices. We're very closely following the initiatives such as the CCPs and the ICBCM, and we'll try to align with what the market sees as best practices. But definitely there is a lot of effort going into trying to understand and to act responding to what the market means.
Thanks, Sue. Megesh, let's close this first round and get to you. I'm hearing a lot about frameworks and standards and following the basic tenets of integrity in the carbon market, right? And I think of the standards, the registries out there as the sort of guardians, the original guardians of integrity, right? As in, like, you guys come up with a methodology to help us issue these credits. What are you seeing? We're seeing more and more standards emerge, right? Some of them are thematic, some of them are regional. Is that necessary and required? Do we need that granularity, or is it actually fragmenting the market further when it comes to integrity?
So what I think is it's doing both, but in a way it's also necessary because we at ACR we're trying to come up with our international methodologies, and what we've found is you can't really fit all regions with one methodology, right, or one standard. Because there's so much diversity when you try to do projects in Asia versus in America, right? So we really tried hard to fit our methodology to make it applicable internationally, globally, but we couldn't really get any projects outside of the US with the same methodology, right? So, because the requirements in that methodology were so specific to North America that we would not be able to generate any projects outside of America. So I think there's need for diversity in standards, but you need to ensure the integrity of the new standard, right? So the new standards can't come and fill in the gaps where the old standards have said that we can't do projects in these areas because of integrity issues, right? So you can't have a new standard come in and allow projects that the old standards have not allowed. So because like registries like ACR have had like 20 years of experience. We've gone through a lot of processes, during the CDM years and post-CDM and Paris Agreement years, right? So, and then we've had experience with, we started with doing projects for the California compliance market, and a lot of our methodologies are from, that market, right? That compliance market. So, so there's a learning curve for establishing a standard that is of high integrity. And, as you do business, a lot of organizations like Corsia or, other, organizations endorse these standards, right? So when a new standard comes up without any endorsement and they allow all sorts of projects, that's going to create a lot of integrity issues. And I think that's what's causing all of this, problem right now in the voluntary carbon market. So, to answer your question, it's both. We need both, but it has to be of high integrity.
So we need the granularity on the regional level, at the credit type level, but we don't need anybody joining in who's going to lower the bar. I see we already have questions from the floor. We can take questions now if you'd like. Do we have a mic on the floor somewhere?
Hello. Thanks for this presentation so far. It's great. I've got two questions, if that's okay. We've been doing some work on, sorry, my name's Rob Fowler. We've been doing some work on the North American system in particular, and we found that there are very poor quality projects in each of the different registries. So it's not so much that one registry is better than another, or one protocol is better than another. Within a protocol, within a registry, there's great and there's awful projects. That's one question. How do we gut through this? Because one of the integrity mechanisms just said we'll do it at the registry level and not individual. But the other question is, when are we going to get someone to come in and say, not so much these are the good ones, but who's going to come in and say these are all the poor ones, don't buy them?
Yeah, so I can just answer on behalf of ACR, I guess, right? I can answer on behalf of other registries, but the way ACR ensures integrity is, we have a different process right at the methodology level. We have our methodologies go through a scientific blind peer review process, right? So it's not just the projects that get verified. Our methodologies get verified by, industry experts or academic experts, or even at times it's, somebody from the industry or the project level, right? So I think, there are a few ways that you could ensure integrity at the registry level. First is never get into a business that has already failed before, right? So at ACR, we don't have any methodologies that for project activities that have already failed under CDM. So our focus is entirely on non-CO2 gases, greenhouse gases on the industrial side, which means, we're only focusing on methane or refrigerants. We don't do any projects that on energy efficiency, that has been controversial in the past, or anything to do with new renewable energy that's added to the grid. We feel that any new renewable energy that's added to the grid is already happening, right? So it's already competitive. So at the registry level itself, we avoid any of these projects We don't do, have any methodologies for these kind of projects. So and another example is, we do projects that have, that have no issues with integrity, like, destruction of ODS, which is, destruction of CFCs or HCFCs that are still, being recycled and reused. So there are no laws in most countries that require destruction of ODS. So we get into, when the registry gets into methodologies and projects that are already additional at the sector level, or the whole sector is already additional, then you could ensure integrity at the registry level itself. So I guess on behalf of Asia, I could say that that's how we are trying to ensure integrity at the registry level by not allowing any projects to be registered through our our registry. So.
Alvin, I saw you mention some of the ratings agencies earlier and how you use them to determine which projects to go for. Do you want to speak about that?
No, I wanted to kind of expand a bit on that question, because I don't think this is just about the registries. The same question could have been applied on a project level, right? How do we know what's good project, bad project, and weed them out? My thought is that let's not make perfect the enemy of good. I'd rather see some action than no action. And over time, as the market matures, as we get more data clarity, there will be a natural self-selection process that will lead to people drifting towards better registries, whatever the quality is, or better projects, however the market chooses to define it. But let's not try to get to perfection today, because then we have no action.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't just mention the ICVCM at that point, right? Like, I think it's very much an effort that is trying to create a little bit of clarity around that, right? So looking at what is a threshold that, regardless of which registry you're in, which methodology you're on, what is a threshold that any project, any credit should meet, right? And like, we don't have it yet. We're not public. Well, we went to public consultation, but I think ideally what we'll see in 2023 is more convergence around that universal threshold of what do we think all of these credits should meet, right? And then I think ideally a lot of convergence also from the registries to really look at which of the methodologies that they're running meet that. Excellent. I wanted to get back to a little bit of what we're seeing in the market at the moment, right? So when you look at the voluntary carbon markets this year, it's slightly slower than last year, and I think we should say that last year was probably a bumper year, right? As in, like, we saw a lot of sort of a lot of credits both issued and retired around COP, lots of announcements coming out. This year was slightly slower. Can I just ask my panelists, what do you think we're going to see next year? Is it going to pick up again? Is integrity, is this focus on transparency actually going to drive confidence in the market? Are retirements going to come back up? What are you seeing?
So clearly, if you look at the industry data, the corporates who are signing up for STVI, net zero targets, that's really going up, and there is no going back on it. In fact, and some of the largest emitters who we found, let's say 10 years back, were not really very clear and even committed to the area of sustainability, now actually are becoming committed because of the investor pressure or the customer pressure, right? So this we see continuing and clearly increasing. Now, if that fundamental driver is in place, then I think that the demand will go up. I mean, currently, of course, because of the economic uncertainty and the uncertainty created due to the war, the demand may have flattened out. It has not gone down, which is in fact a positive, not gone down substantially, it's a positive impact. And clearly, right now, for example, we are doing digital sustainability work also to help corporates monitor their net zero commitments. And we are getting so many inquiries from people who want to set up tools so that they can dynamically monitor their emission levels and see whether they are on that trajectory or not. So the commitment is getting serious, and I think definitely the long-term demand is going to increase, in my opinion.
My gosh.
So it's this year has been like a confusing year, because it started with ACR had like the highest requests for setting up accounts this year compared to last year, and then our voluntary credits that were we call them issuance, and then after that, after issuance, it gets activated. Means people actually transact that credits. Was the highest this year for voluntary carbon voluntary projects, right? So it's been confusing because I think in the last month or so, I've been hearing that there's been a slowdown in the market, but I think the reason for that is all of these integrity things that have come up, and the corporates are kind of the buyers are kind of confused whether we should buy it right now or wait for a few months. So I think this is kind of a temporary thing. There's been a lot of demand for credits, and in some way I think it's going to be difficult to keep up with demand as we reach towards the net zero targets, right? So I mean it's a risk that that has to be considered carefully, whether you should buy right now when it's cheap, and assume some risk, the buyers, right? Because you can get it cheap right now because nobody's buying, right? But then you could also take another risk and wait and buy it later on at a higher price, right? So, but I don't think there's going to be a shortage of demand. This is a very temporary thing because, everybody is trying to buy offsets. Everybody has these net zero targets. Everybody is trying to lower their emissions, right? So at some point, there'll be a time where everybody is going to try to buy offsets, and the integrity thing is going to be more of a background issue at that time because the bigger goal is we need to reach that 1.5 degree goal, right? So people talk about SDGs, people talk about co-benefits, but at the core it's the GHG reduction that matters, right? We're looking at climate targets. We're not looking at sustainable development targets. So at one point, I think the bigger role is on the buyer's side. Whether you trust the rating agencies or you trust whoever is kind of guiding you on this process, I think the bigger responsibility is on buyers that have these net zero targets, because at some point you have to do something, right? So I think it's better that the buyers use their own common sense and their own due diligence to figure out whether a project credit that you're buying is actually a real credit or not, right? So I think we should get past this noise of integrity and all this confusion and just get to the bottom and look at the projects and see if it's really doing something or not. Because at the end, we don't want any greenhouse gas that's there to be emitted from today onwards. Like every minute that we wait, we're wasting time, and we're allowing some of these GHGs to be emitted, right? So, for example, a refrigerator that's still using CFCs, or a supermarket that's still using CFCs, they leak 50% of whatever they use every year. So every day, just calculate how much is being emitted when you're not taking an action or incentivizing that supermarket to switch to something low GWP, right? So there's a big consequence of waiting. So my advice would be, just get over it, because there's a risk anyhow, and just go forward and start incentivizing this action as soon as possible.
I mean, you're saying back to the big picture, we need to halt climate change now, right?
Yeah, we need to do it. We don't have time to waste at all. So we can't waste time. As all of this is happening, we see that the market is slowing just because of this noise, right? So, but we don't have time to do that. So, I think sooner or later this is going to be realized, and then the market's going to come up, pretty strong.
Right. So demand's going to outstrip supply just because we can't even find that many emission reductions. Takashi, as a market observer, what are you seeing?
Yes. Answer is yes. So the steadily growth. That is my view. So but different from this year. So this year or last year, Asia is the center of the supply side. But maybe next year, the much bigger demand will be appeared. So both supply side and the demand side, the market is growing. The reason why the demand side is increasing is as I mentioned, disclosures, like International Financial Standard, IFRS, ISSB, US ACC, and the US Energy Transition Task Force. Many initiatives are emerging and push the company to disclose the climate change risk. So all of them show the idea and the concept of offset mechanism. So that is a driving force of the increase of demand in Asia. But we have to think about the uncertainty as well. So the first uncertainty is the Article 6.4 and 6.2. So in addition to the voluntary side, like Japan, quasi-regulatory framework is emerging. And the other country, yesterday, the Indonesian government said that Indonesia is going to adopt the carbon pricing. So the regulation, if we come for the company or for the buyer, which is higher priority? It is very simple. First, the regulation. So that is an uncertainty. But also, another important thing is the economy itself. So maybe next year, economic growth in the global market is lower than this year. So that is an uncertainty. But that is a rather short term. So the decarbonization, that is a long term. And so even though the next year's economy is down, but many companies, many industries would like to take action to follow the right way. But again, the drivers and both drivers of growth and uncertainty, we have carefully reviewed it. That's my view.
We're just hearing about there we go. We're just hearing about some of the compliance schemes that are coming online in Asia, right? But like at the same time, I think what we see in voluntary markets, it's huge volume coming out of Asia, especially on the NCS side. Can we get a little bit of a view from Alvin and Sue? Like, is this going to be the decade for Asia, and like what's going to happen in this region that's different from other regions?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's really exciting to see what's been happening in Asia in the last year and the last couple of years. You see a lot of activity around Indonesia, like you were saying, also Malaysia opening their exchange as well, initiatives at the state level in Malaysia as well. So I think that it's a really exciting time for the region. I think that especially when it comes to NCS, there is a real opportunity for the region to be even more a source of supply, I want to say, high quality supply. And I think it's really exciting to see that countries are also very eagerly addressing and trying to navigate these challenges. I think that, yes, there is a lot of excitement and we all want to see more of this happening, but at the same time, we know that the institutional infrastructure and the frameworks that countries need to leverage this opportunity is not there yet. So I think that's where a lot of the focus is going to be in the next year, into keeping an eye and trying to support countries to develop these frameworks and really leverage this opportunity. The other thing that is really exciting as well to see is to look at the regional cooperation that is happening as well. So I think that things like Singapore and all these efforts that the government is making into having Singapore be a trading hub, a carbon hub. But not just that, also looking at the activities that they're doing in signing MOUs for Article 6.2 cooperation with countries in the region as well. I think, or Japan, that are also having these types of conversation. I think that can really bring the region as a whole to a different level, to really push forward, to really have opportunities for knowledge sharing, exchange. And again, you can see some of these things in like countries that are more advanced are already moving to, let's talk about Article 6.2. Whereas in other cases, like Singapore, for example, is supporting as well initiatives on the research side for some other less developed areas. So I think that can really help the region grow and develop into a more mature market that will ultimately benefit both the compliance markets that are booming, but also the voluntary side as well.
Thanks. Maybe before just jumping into the views on the Asian carbon markets, but just want to build a bit about what Takashi and Migesh say actually on the demand side. Because if I look at the last year, today I probably have the highest reverse inquiry still of corporates in Asia looking and having the willingness to participate in the voluntary carbon markets. I think many of them have, I agree, delayed some of their purchase because they're trying to get more clarity around standards, what is acceptable. But the willingness to participate is as high as I've seen it since I've been at MS. So I'm actually pretty optimistic about 2023 in terms of demand. Not in 2023, but the next 3 to 6 months where we see the demand coming in. I think maybe building on what Sue said about for Asia Pacific, I think we emit, as I mean, Asia Pacific as a block emits more than 50% of the global emissions. But let's also not forget that we have some of the largest tropical rainforests and carbon sinks in our backyard in Southeast Asia, right? And I think unlike some of the other more developed compliance markets, the linkages between the compliance and the voluntary market in Asia is more apparent. This is true in Singapore as it is in China and South Korea. There is more linking. Now that linkage is actually very important because it drives a permanent demand base for carbon credits, right? It drives a market kind of sentiment around the quality of these credits, that there will be a demand there, that this is of high integrity. I think this is something that's a bit more unique in Asia than perhaps some of the existing compliance market in the developed space. On top of that, what I've actually seen is that Asian regulators are actually very supportive of this market. Singapore is a clear example, right? With plans to develop Singapore as a carbon trading and services hub, right? Many of us in this room have offices, have headcount in Singapore. But this is not just a Singapore story, because the same can be said in Malaysia with Bursa, with Hong Kong with Core Climate, in Japan with GX League. There are examples all over Southeast Asia, and in the next 12 months, I think we will see more regulators promote carbon markets as a whole. And it's not just carbon, but it's also the whole chain of value chain providers and service providers in the ecosystem, right? So we see that growth in Asian markets in the next 5-10 years for sure, but even next year we see demand coming through.
Sue, can I double click on something that Alvin just said, which was that convergence between voluntary and compliance that we're seeing in Asia? That's something you're excited about, something you're worried about, something that's going to drive or hinder sort of the voluntary carbon market development?
No, I agree with Alvin's view. I think that on one hand, it's going to really support the demand as well. And at the same time, I think because it is different, it will just support the entire value chain, right? I think that it creates it kind of pushes a little bit that part of regulators that are already excited about this market, but really actually making them work harder into, okay, but how do we make sure if you want to have a compliance market, then you need to have certain regulations in place, you need to understand the market, and you need to achieve this combination. I think a lot of the conversations in the region in countries that hold some of these carbon sinks are around how are these two going to interact and how are we going to leverage the opportunity of the voluntary markets while supporting the growth of domestic and compliance markets. So yeah, we
excitement all around. Excitement. Nope.
I'd like to add to what Sue just said about the convergence. I remember something from yesterday's speaker who said that the credits themselves are not voluntary, right? It's the process in which they are purchased is voluntary. So, there's a project that generates offsets. It could be under the compliance market or it could be under a voluntary methodology, right? But it's just a process that it could be bought by anybody, right? It could be bought under a compliance market or it could be bought under the voluntary market. For example, in California, the offsets that are generated by using California CARB methodology, they have an option to sell it in the voluntary as well as the compliance market. So, it's already converging. It's just a matter of, whether it's a voluntary net zero targets or is it a compliance target? I think the distinction is on the buyer side.
So it's old news to California, but it's new news to the rest of the world. I want to open up to the room. I obviously have many more questions I could ask, but you've been hearing me talk for almost an hour. So are there any questions from the floor for our panel? comments? If not, I'm going to keep talking. Really? Nobody? Okay, I'm going to let you think about that and ask one last question to the panel. So we've sort of been touching on it a little bit in terms of sort of like, you know, the transparency universe, the data disclosure that we need, how we may need better ways and tools of connecting markets to really scale the growth and sustain the demand. But something we saw here at the Asia Climate Summit yesterday was the launch of the Climate Action Data Trust by IETA and the World Bank, supported by Chia Network. And that's really meant to be, I think we're losing the mic. That's really meant to be a meta registry that harmonizes data from different registries, right? So I'd love to just hear from the panel a little bit. Where do you see the use cases for open data? Is that going to make your life easier? Is that going to help the market? I'm going to start with Magesh because ACR is also on the Council for CAD. What are the opportunities you see?
I think the biggest advantage of CAD Trust, which is based on Climate Warehouse, is enhanced transparency, right? Because ACR is already a public registry, and you can go there and find, there's a lot of public data on all projects, and you can even, look at some of the project documents, right? But what this CAD Trust through the Climate Warehouse has done is it's kind of it's kind of brought different registries that use different terminologies and kind of made them into a common, term, so that, if somebody goes to this CAD Trust database and tries to find a project, you can compare between projects between registries, right? So I think that's the biggest advantage. It's almost like a one-stop where you could see all projects and kind of follow where it originated, where it is now, who was it sold to, and all that stuff. So, but if you want to get more data, like deeper information on actual project documents and stuff like that, then you have to go back to the registry itself. Besides that, ACR is also linked with Air Carbon Exchange, CVL platforms of I think expansive. So registries have been tying up with all of these exchanges just to enhance the market and expand the market. I think the biggest advantage of CAD, which is not a place where you can actually shop for credits, but you can find it's more of an informative kind of database, which kind of enhances transparency, I guess.
Vinod, same question to you.
In fact, interestingly, we have been developing a platform for our internal transactions, plus maybe buyers and sellers who are associated with the projects, to track the project through its life. So not only the various kinds of project documents, how it has gone, what kind of validation verification has been performed, how it has performed so far, any kind of issues raised in the external market about that project, all that is tracked as a data. And that's useful, I think, for our internal work, but I think the way the CAD is coming up, a lot of that element actually will become possibly the structure or the framework for the international data, kind of availability. So this makes it easy, and if you actually use blockchain properly, then this data is traceable whenever you really want to trace it. Even if you bought only a part of that particular project, credits and not the entire credit, that still can be traced credit-wise. So this is a very important, I think, development. If this happens, I think a significant part of integrity issues can be tackled because standards are also improving, and plus this data is available. Then at least you have, as Takashi-san says, the disclosure on both the buyer side, but this is the seller side availability of data as well. That makes it easy for people to make judgments and integrity assessments. So I think it will be very, very important development, and we are all looking forward to that to take off.
Can I turn to the right side of the panel? What are your hopes and dreams for open data, and how is it going to make the carbon market better and more transparent?
Why don't I start first? Welcome it. Really excited to see that over the last 2-3 years, we've had a lot more digital tools introduced into the voluntary carbon markets. Just a few years ago, this market has always been rather opaque, right? Trades are done bilaterally. Over the last 2 years, what have we seen? More marketplaces, be it CBL, air carbon, climate impacts, that increase accessibility to more market participants. We have seen other service providers like the rating agencies, like your Silvera, your B0, Calix, Trove, again, providing better clarity on the project, right? And now we have the climate warehouse. As we get more of these digital tools, increases transparency and integrity in the market. I think that helps build confidence for more market participants to enter.
Great. Sue, keep going. We still don't have audience questions. Nobody wants to ask us anything. Keep going.
No, I think it's exciting. I think generally, again, going back to this issue of increasing transparency, increasing integrity, we're quite excited and supportive of these initiatives that bring more transparency to the market. I think, yeah, what Albin mentioned as well is that we need to see how we best use these digital tools. I think the question is, for us, is similarly with other initiatives, we're following closely and observing and trying to understand what the impact might be. I think this brings an important part of the puzzle on the transparency issue. There are other issues that we also need to address, right? And how this all going to come together is something that we want to see where it goes.
Yes, and frankly speaking, I'm very much interested in digital carbon and CAD Trust initiative. And maybe it will be a very big stream in a carbon market. But the one thing we have to remind is a kind of rules for the market. Market discipline, something, as you said, transparency, it is one of the elements of the market discipline. So IETA, the disclose and the release the code of best practice of the digital carbon, such kind of the rule is necessary, particularly the consumer protection and also auditing the companies. And about the potential, so three components about the digital carbon in terms of the value chain, MRV and the trading and the financial settlement. So far, CAD Trust is only the middle, but it has a big potential of the MRV, digital MRV. Maybe the methodology is different from the existence methodology, but like with the smart meters, they're very easy to be evaluate the reduction. So the open data is very useful for the digital MRV. And also the one other thing, yeah, okay, that's it, my.
Thank you so much.
Big potential, that is my point.
We've all spent a wonderful hour together. I'm hearing about integrity and quality. I don't want to keep anybody from their coffee break, but I'd love to hear in one sentence or less from all of our panelists, what's your number one take-home message for the audience to go home with today?
Yeah, my message would be time is of essence. We're in an emergency. We should not be, we should not waste any more time in the middle processes. We talk about commodity and all that stuff, but at the end, it's the climate. We're trying to reduce global warming. That's the end goal. I would like everybody to remember that.
So clearly, the key message that I take from this is that market is set to take off, and I think the integrity measures that are being taken right now are timely, because that will help the market to expand with confidence.
My word is business as usual. So then currently the carbon market is new for many people, but the carbon market is indispensable the option for reducing emission economically. From that point of view, the carbon market is going to be business as usual, like a commodity market, energy market, food market.
I think for me it would be comfortable with uncertainty. I think it's going to take us a while to figure things out, and we cannot let that stop us from acting, and then be ready to adapt as we go, as we figure this.
And now, but just saying that we're in a climate emergency, and the time to act is now. Let's not make perfect the enemy of good. Let's start somewhere.
Excellent. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you from me and from IETA. Thank you to the audience. If you want to watch it again, we're going to have a recording on the website. I know you want to hear it all once more. And with that, let's give a hand to our panel.